You're listening to A Quality Podcast with your hosts, John Thacker Jr. and Jake Harrell.
But I would say the method you want is you want to be doing the sort of the iterative sprint type stuff early on when you don't know what to do. And so if you make mistakes, you can quickly recover, that sort of thing. And then as you get into, okay, now I know what I'm gonna build, or I know what the design is, and now I need to go out and get the equipment. I need to build the factory. I need to do all these sorts of things. I need to make it reliable. I need to do all that. That's when a phased gate, more disciplined, linear march through the project becomes worthwhile. And so.
And welcome everybody to A Quality Podcast. I'm your host, John Thacker. With me today is co-host Jake Harrell and Mark Sneeringer. Mark is a continuous improvement consultant specializing in design for Six Sigma, particularly around new product introduction. Mark, why don't you say hi to everybody?
Hello.
So Mark, tell us a little bit about what you're into now, how you got into consulting in this design for Six Sigma.
Started out in Six Sigma and Design for Six Sigma back when GE did, back in the mid 90s, and ended up doing a few roles there, starting from the research labs where we were rolling out DFSS to the rest of the corporation. So got involved heavily there. Spent 3 years then as the Design for Six Sigma and reliability leader for GE's appliance business before leaving to join Philips. And at Philips had a number of continuous improvement roles, plus project management roles or program management roles, and ended up last role there before retiring I was the continuous improvement leader for their healthcare division. So starting sort of mid-90s, got involved in this stuff, which was a shift from the engineering and manufacturing type stuff I'd been doing before that. And it was very interesting. And when DFSS got me excited, it was one of those things where it's good enough and people appreciate it or use it enough that if a boss said you have to stop doing it, people would do it behind their back, right? Because it's useful methodology. So
awesome, that's pretty cool. Jake, I see you've got your light stick going on. Why don't you say hi to everybody so we can see how cool your studio looks today?
Oh, are you enjoying the light stick now?
There you go. Yeah,
I thought he was making. I thought he was building lightsabers. Okay, sorry.
If you didn't know, Mark, John, how I got Mark to fall into our lap was his snarky LinkedIn commentary. I'm like, this guy gets along with us, like is speaking the same language, because we kind of do that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good, Mark. Welcome to the show. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about risk management, particularly because maybe it's not done so well these days. So why don't we give folks a little bit of an outline, particularly around like new product introduction. Talk to me about sort of what risk management is, what it looks like, what we mean when we're talking about that.
Okay, so a risk is something that could go wrong, right? And then risk management is how you deal with that, either in terms of trying to avoid it, trying to move it to somebody else, trying to mitigate it, or even say, hey, I'm going to accept that risk and just run with it. So risk management then gets mainly into the mitigation piece of it, where you're saying, how probable is this? How big an impact is it going to have if it did happen? And then what can I do about it to keep it from happening? So reduce that probability of the occurrence. of the issue. That's the main kind of risk management. I'll talk a little bit later about a different flavor of it that gets useful when you're doing, say, new product ideation, in the discovery or function development phase. But that's basically it. Bad things can happen. This is trying to avoid them keep them from happening.
I have to preface my bias here is every risk management structure strategy I've been a part of just honestly sucked. Like, it didn't create any value for the op and for the people doing it, touching it. So I'm interested in one, Mark, how do you make that valuable for the folks trying to bring a new product online?
So you usually recognize the value when something you should have dealt with goes wrong. I mean, I've had, or you've started to do something about it, but you didn't follow through. So I've had situations where all of a sudden you'll have a field failure problem on a product, and you go back and you look at your failure mode effects analysis, your FMEA, and sure enough, it's in there. But there's no mitigation attached to it, or the mitigation is basically just, hey, we rationalized that we had done something about this, even though we hadn't, so we could get the check mark and move on. And so you learn the value of doing it generally by failing. It's the old quote, good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment. So, yeah.
So are there a handful of risks that, you've seen as fairly common when it comes to new product introduction?
There's categories. So things like there's things like resources. Will you have the resources you need when you need them? So this is built around the project itself. Cost. Is this thing going to cost what we think it's going to cost, or is there something that could make it cost a lot more that we could do something about to deal with? So it's more around the categories more than saying, oh yeah, you always see this one. But there are some some common things that you want to look for as you go about it, and it's mainly things: what could throw our timing off? Is there a piece of equipment that we're going to need that we don't know how easily it is to get it? Those sorts of things. More categories than individual questions at that point.
Yeah. So if you look at your Gantt chart or whatever tool we're using for the project, the timing affects a lot of other stuff too, right? I mean, It affects cost, obviously. Like you said, if you're getting tooling and it's not there, that delays the rest of the project. I outfitted a factory a year or so ago, and the tooling was coming from Italy and China, and this was COVID times. So it ended up pushing back the implementation, many months, 6 or 8 months. Particularly the Italian machines. Just the way that the government was changing the rules as they went along it affected that. And then they had the same risk at their level, like in miniature. So we had the machines that they were building for us, and they had to be outfitted with, US Electrics, and their supplier for that couldn't get them their stuff to finish the machine, so they could send it to us, cascade effect. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. So did you guys have any sort of mitigation in place or a contingency in place for this? Or did you just say, oh gosh, we're gonna accept this and be late?
We really just accepted it because it was a greenfield. There was nothing else going on in this building. We were using it as a transportation hub, in the meantime. So supplying it with product from a different plant and then transferring it like final mile delivery type of thing. So we were utilizing the property for that, but we just had to wait.
Okay. Yeah, that's sometimes those are difficult to overcome, but there's when you look at this and say, this is a critical piece of equipment, if it's late, the whole thing's going to be late. You can say, okay, are there, mitigation might be, hey, if we lose 2 months there, is there some place further down the track where we can make up those 2 months, and so start the actions now to be able to make up those 2 months, or is there someplace else we can get this piece of equipment? Or can we build by hand until the equipment's available? Those sorts of things are the sorts of stuff that you sort of push teams on to say, all right, if you're going to have a problem, what could you do about it? Either in terms of setting up a contingency plan or figuring out how to fix the problem faster, or prop it up before it falls over, sort of thing. So.
I think a common one I see in institution, of course, these are W-2 jobs in life, but is resources is the risk number one, where we don't want to give the right amount of people, expertise, time to actually do the thing we set out to do. So everybody's aligned with the goal, but nobody's aligned with assigning the right amount of resources. So how do you approach that, Mark, and what you do in your daily life? So
getting the right amount of resources and stuff like that is a big piece of project management, and I find good project managers are fairly rare. People that can sit down, do a work breakdown structure, figure out what sort of resources they need, then go, take all that data to the leadership and say, this is what I need, and if you give me less, here's what it's going to do. Where I find the risk is when you say, all right, in that plan, I'm going to need expert XYZ at this point, right? And they're just not available, and the probability of them being available is low enough that says, okay, that's when I want to mitigate in terms of the resources. I either want to find somebody else that can do it. I want to build their time to be as efficient as possible. Something like that to help overcome that lack of resource or the timing of that resource. Yeah, but you're right. Resources, both in terms of people, materials, equipment. Those are in a project. Those are big risks.
John, do you see that as constraint numero uno in most of your improvement projects?
Yeah, it's not always a constraint, but it is often a challenge, overlooked, not considered really to the level it should be. And kind of piggybacking off of what Mark, what you were saying was, I've worked with a lot of project managers that were good at work breakdown structures and figuring out needed work, needed resources to get the work done. They weren't very good at communicating that to management. And I've worked with other project managers that were, very good at communicating with senior management, but they didn't have the data to back up what they were asking for, kind of thing. And sort of finding those two skills together, it has been rare just in my experience.
Yeah. Good. As I said, good project managers are definitely rare. And when you find one, hang on to them. So.
Yeah, definitely. Jake wouldn't know anything about that. So going back to risk management, tell me a little bit more about that. We mentioned sometimes it's not done very effectively. What are your thoughts around that?
So one of the things I see is people get wrapped up in discussions of what's possible, what things are possible to go wrong, right? And never segue over to what's the probability. So what are the most probable things that are going to go wrong, or what's the impact if they do? So people get, they'll get all riled up about, oh my gosh, this thing could fail in so many, in this way. But if you sit there and you say, yeah, but the probability of that is really low. Why do you want to spend energy on that? So that's one of the things, is that they never get beyond sort of what their fears are about doing it. So that's one. The other is that this risk assessment, risk management is often seen as a checkbox exercise by a team. You know, there's a deliverable of an FMEA at this point. So we'll go through, we'll write it up, we're done, right? Don't really follow up with the mitigations, even if they, one, sometimes they don't plan the mitigations, two, if they plan them, but they don't follow through on them. So there isn't a follow through after that initial assessment. So those are two main ones. And then the other one that I've run into more in the, in like the medical device world, where in the highly regulated world, is people confusing risk management around the product or around the project with the risk management that's driven by regulatory stuff. So if you say, all right, that risk management is about how could this product hurt somebody, right? Or how could this product, fail to do what it's designed to do, and at that point, once again, that's once they say, okay, we're not going to hurt somebody, they say, yeah, we did a risk assessment, we did risk management, and they didn't look at anything about execution or even with product, failure modes that aren't going to hurt someone. So those were some of the things that I see as, stopping people from being effective at this. So.
Let me just ask the expert, how do you separate my irrational fear of what could go wrong from what could reasonably go wrong? Because that's what I see time and time again when this conversation comes up, is what are my personal irrational fears getting projected into this project and not necessarily what makes sense or is reasonable.
So data is one, or, that's one thing. If you say, hey, my big worry is I'm sitting here 40 miles from Mount Rainier and it's going to explode, right? And it's going to wipe out our factory in the process, or that sort of thing. And you sit there and say, okay, let's look at how often Mount Rainier has exploded, over geologic time. And yeah, there's a probability of that happening, but it's really, really slight. So if your irrational fear is volcanoes erupting, you can go look at how many volcanoes erupt in your neighborhood and say, okay, is that something I'm going to try to mitigate? So, you might, you could be worried about that, and at the same time, not be worried about the fact that, your area has power outages pretty often. And what do you have in terms of backup generators and things like that, rather than worrying about, a natural disaster that's going to take out, a fair amount of the suburbs of Seattle if it happens. So. Or the exurbs, the towns that are sitting on the flanks of the volcano. So,
John and I had a thought experiment we were giving each other once, in which I asked him, all right, you're the CEO of a company, and I'm asking you to manage this company without the use of data. How would you do it? And John said, I wouldn't.
I think I would agree with John on that one. Yeah. You're not going to get very far just on your gut feel. So yeah, data is probably the main one. The other one is just, talking through some of these irrational fears to say, all right, what is it, why do you think that's going to happen? And then maybe get down to something that's, treated almost like problem solving, where you get down to a root cause that you can address. That may be a way to look at it.
Yeah, and sometimes the stakeholders that are sort of involved don't understand that their fears are irrational, or maybe have a low probability. But I've also seen that the other direction, where risks that on the significance scale, are higher than a 3, let's say, but they're ignored, and their probability is high as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like we've always done it that way, it's conditioning. This kind of failure happens all the time.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the assessment and this planning is a team activity and not an individual thing. So you want and a team that's willing to, maybe take on that stakeholder that's, that gets noisy about, about a particular risk or the lack or ignoring a particular risk. So it's it's a team sport. It's not individual.
Can I ask that you have the Declaration of Independence? Well, it looks like the back of it framed on your wall behind you. What do we
No,
have
that's
there?
actually a map of Ireland. I lived in Ireland for a couple of years, so my wife found that while we were living over there. It's an 1850s or 60s map of Ireland. So
It didn't go bra. You know why they used maps back then instead of globes?
They
Because
thought
the
the Earth
Earth was
was flat. No.
Exactly. That's why.
No, no.
Well, there's the globe.
Well, it's a lot easier to keep a map in your pocket than a globe. We'll just say
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, risk management. Sometimes it's ineffective, and then new product introduction. Right. I know that you're involved heavily in that. So how does I guess the flavor of risk management, like how does it change or evolve a little bit as you go from just regular risk management to new product introduction?
So there's a few of us that we did a webinar on this a while back, where it was the point that we were trying to make on it was that when you're going from, say, your fuzzy idea to a product, there's actually two stages in that. One is function development, where you're getting to a feasible design, and then the second stage is actually the product development or the product realization. And the way you manage that, and this is, you hear the big fight about sprint, agile sprints versus waterfall. The way to manage that is use sprints in the beginning to get through and get to that feasible design, and then use waterfall in the back end, because that's where you want flawless execution to get to the actual product. So if you make that split, say sprints beginning, phase gate or waterfall in the back, in the front end, the risks that you're dealing with are things you just don't know. So if you say you're making a bunch of assumptions as you go in, and so the whole thing there in risk management is changing those assumptions into knowledge. So what are the activities I'm going to do to change, to change that unknown or that assumption into knowledge? And you can one of the metrics on this is actually the ratio of assumptions to knowledge. And so that's the front end. In the back end, once you get into, now I've got an idea or got the design and I need to execute on it, that's where sort of the classic thing that's failure mode effects analysis or project risk management comes in, where it's probability, impact, how well can I see this thing coming before it hits me, and coming up with with plans for the things that are high probable, high impact, low visibility.
Now you're gonna hurt a bunch of fundamentalist feelings when you said sprint to your first waterfall. And there's people on the internet every day I fight. They're like, no, you just need to operate in sprints. No, you just need a scaled agile methodology. I'm like, stop.
So I've got a guy I used to work with at Philips who's heavily into the scaled agile stuff and everything like that. And one of the things he talks about is that's a very resource intense methodology. And so you say, yeah, if you want to go that direction, then you've got to commit to having all the different layers of stuff. And I guess I found in my experience that the waterfall or the phase gate stuff works very well. Works well across all of it, but in this more, talking with these other guys that were involved in the webinar, it's like, yeah, the sort of the free flowing ideas, that sort of stuff that you can get in a sprint situation, works better in the foundation, when you're building the function of the product in the early stages, the ideation, the gathering the voice of the customer, that sort of stuff.
I might offend some lean community aficionados listening today, but I'm just going to say it. Just pick a damn structure and stick to it. I don't even care if it's the same structure as mine. If you like, ooh, well, I'm a waterfall agilist. No, I'm an agile waterfallist. Stop. Like, just pick a structure and stick to it.
But I think what I took away from that, though, the process that you're in the middle of executing has characteristics that change as you go along, and that may require the use of different tools. And I think this kind of relates to, not just new product introduction. And I want to talk about some unique risks there in a minute, but you're just running a distribution facility for Amazon or something like that. These large companies, they come in and they sort of make a whole cloth copy of something they're already doing. The other 99%, they start out in the back of somebody's garage, right? And then they build up. And folks that aren't experienced, I think, with lean methodology, as an example, they try to apply like all the tools in the same way to the garage that they do to the Amazon warehouse. Does that make sense? When in fact, your selection of tool methodology should be driven by the needs of what you're actually doing. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Jake, you're saying pick a method and stay with it. I would say yes, stay with it. But I would say the method you want is you want to be doing the sort of the iterative sprint type stuff early on when you don't know what to do. And so if you make mistakes, you can quickly recover, that sort of thing. And then as you get into, okay, now I know what I'm gonna build, or I know what the design is, and now I need to go out and get the equipment. I need to build the factory. I need to do all these sorts of things. I need to make it reliable. I need to do all that. That's when a phase gate, more disciplined, linear march through the project becomes worthwhile. And so I would say, yeah, pick that and stay with it. Don't say halfway, there's a point where you say, okay, we're going to switch cars from sprint to phase gate, but you can do that, and it will, I think this is the way for things to go forward in new product development. So it's making both of those camps somewhat unhappy.
So with new product introduction, there's some special risks, right? And I'm thinking particularly the way that operations have to interface with, work with marketing, right, and sales. So, there's many projects where the outcome of the project doesn't affect, like, I just bought $3 billion worth of TV ad space on this thing, right? It has to be available to go to market at this time, right? Can you talk through like a couple of really just the impact of that particular, like the customer facing side?
I mean,
how that affects,
that's why a good new product development process, and I'll talk waterfall here or phase gate. That's why it's a cross-functional operation. I mean, you've got a core team that's probably the technical project manager, somebody from manufacturing, somebody from marketing, somebody from supplier, from supply chain, that sort of stuff. And those folks have to get working together early, very early, so that, if you've got I've spent this big bucket of money on advertising space at Christmas, then okay, you've got to take that into account as you're laying out the plan to say, I've got to be in the store or, available to be in the store in late August, because that's when the folks like Walmart and folks like that set their Christmas lineup. So that you deal with by it being a full contact cross-functional methodology of doing your new product development. It's not a bunch of scientists hanging out in the lab and then throwing something over the wall to the manufacturing guys who eventually tell the marketing guys what's going on. So.
Yeah, and I like how you brought out the retail cycle there, because it highlights there's exterior factors that you have to take into account, right? With medical devices, we talked about, there's federal regulation that you have to meet. That applies, to other sectors, but things like cars and needles, have a much higher level of requirement and scrutiny. But then you also have retail cycle, and the retail cycle is also kind of driven by consumer habits and behavior. And then you have these like industry cycles. So you probably noticed in cell phones, for example, it's now like there's going to be a new model every year, but it's like every third year is like the wow new model. And with cars, a model has a 10-year life cycle with a mid-cycle refresh type of thing. So these are all factors that I think, effective risk management kind of has to take into account, right?
Yeah, and once again, it's it goes beyond risk management from the standpoint of some of that's good project management, some of it is good portfolio management. So having a multi-generation product plan that says, okay, new platform car comes out this year, 2 years from now, we'll be adding these features to it. 2 more years after that, those features will be added. 2 more years after that, new platform. That sort, so that you have that sort of long-term planning. And long-term depends on your industry. So if you're in cell phones, long-term is I'm going to have 4 models in less than 4 years. Or if you're doing, MRIs, I'm going to have 4 models over the next 20 years, that sort of thing. So it depends on your industry what that cycle is. And so that's more in the planning type of stuff rather than in, okay, I'm in the project and now I need to understand and handle the risks that I'm dealing with.
John, has there been a game-changing car in the last decade?
I think you could probably, call the Tesla that. I think it's less than 10 years old, the Model S. We'll probably, historians will probably look back at this time and say that, Tesla changed the game. But that's the only one that really comes to mind.
You put a completely different drivetrain than what was there 20 years ago. And back on the risk management stuff. You guys work with like failure modes and effects analysis, FMEA at all?
All the time.
You used it?
Oh yeah, all the time.
What upsets you about it? What do you worry about?
Well, to jump off, I remember working at a distribution center for Tier 1 automotive, and we had an FMEA. I think the 2 biggest concerns I had about it, one, it was on like a document sharing platform, think like a standard shared drive, except, controlled access for write. So it was not easily accessible. And second, the kind of language, like in the mitigation part, was also not very accessible, kind of engineering-y. And last but not least, I think we reviewed it once a year.
Yeah.
So I just kind of felt like it was something they did because the operating system said I had to have it. But it didn't seem like it was a living tool that, was really used.
Yeah.
AS9100 environment, the last one I touched or was a part of, small aircraft materials being kitted over to, build airplanes just in time. And almost exactly what John said. It was a thing that was like, it's a tick in the box so I can get past the rest of my AS9100 certification. It's not something anyone used to drive any real value to the site. Now, I have had the extreme opposite, where in a distribution center of mine, there was really well detailed what the possible failure modes could be. And someone had directly correlated them with who was getting fired or disciplined for when they happened. And I just thought, oh my God, you acknowledge, as a human being, you acknowledge that the system will produce this outcome with a certain probability, and you built in who to irrationally hold accountable for it, which it just summarizes my career in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, it sort of violates fix the problem, not the blame. So what I found on FMEA is difficult to start. In other words, if you don't have one, say on a product or on a process, building it does take time, right? The advantage, though, then is once you have it, is it is updating it. Is the question is, well, what's changed since the last time we looked at it? Annual updates, that's fairly common, and it probably is something that there should be some sort of a periodic check to say, is this still the same? But where I found it most useful is when, say, say on a product FMEA, you get surprised by something in the field. All of a sudden you're failing by a new failure mode or a different failure mode, is to immediately go back and add that failure mode to the FMEA, right? And so that make it more of a living document than something that sits on the shelf for 360 days a year and then gets pulled down for 5 to update it, that sort of thing. So that's one thing. The other, on process FMEA, there was a group that I worked with, or I knew the guys in it when I was in GE, that actually had a couple graybeards or a few graybeards sat down with like 3 years worth of field failure data, related everything that they could from there back into process defects, and came up with a list of 13 questions which they used to do a process FMEA. In other words, it wasn't just start with a blank sheet of paper, it's you run through these 13 questions. So they took something that was a 2-day exercise for their business down to a half a day. So there was a time savings in doing it. Plus it actually got more accurate. So as they went further along, in time, they found that, this was a better predictor of what the issues they would see and therefore drive the mitigations. So that's one of the pathologies, is this is something, it's a checkbox exercise. I've got to do it, or otherwise I won't get through the gate, or I won't get my certification, as a factory or something like that. So it's problem, it is a problem to get it to be a living document with folks, but once you do, it does add value. So
yeah, one of the most critical points in kind of my standard operating procedure meeting with a business is, what does their communication cadence look like? If it's daily, that's the most ideal. And then just engineer your failure modes into that daily discussion. Either we're learning about a new thing we didn't know could go wrong before, or we're revisiting things we already knew could go wrong so we can actually solve them. And I found that's like one of the fastest ways to learn how to actually manage your business. And it's surprising to me every time I engage with a business that's never done that before.
Yeah. Definitely agree with you. Daily management is where a lot of this stuff will come up. Especially in a process, you'll start, if you're tracking things and, hey, this bar on the Pareto has gotten bigger. Let's pull up the process FMEA and see, is it in there? And if it is, what did we say we were going to do about it? And if it's not in there, then let's get the countermeasure, or get the mitigation in place, so that we can deal with it. So yeah, it's using things like daily management, or the data collection that you're doing, to inform it and to drive updates to it that'll make it more useful.
Yeah, I've also seen a gap between tool use here related to like scalability. So most of the FMEAs that I'm familiar with, they sort of deal with things like a hurricane, right? Real. It's a real risk, and we have to have a backup plan. How do we get our data? Are we going to run a paper operation? Do we have some other means of continuing production? What about safety of employees? All of that stuff. So great, a real risk and something that you have to plan for. But then the like regularly repeated smaller risks that are part of just doing business every day are kind of left out and absorbed just in your daily, like your tier meeting structure, right? Where you have, okay, here's our control chart. We're here. So what's the countermeasure, right? But nobody ever takes that chart and says, okay, this particular failure mode happens at this sort of frequency with whatever the outcome is to the business, and sort of captures that anywhere. And I get that, like that's a lot of work. I get it. But what are your thoughts there? Like,
if you've got an FMEA already, if you've got the process FMEA there, and this comes up, and it's not a lot of work to turn to somebody, usually the engineer that's there in your day, watching this, and go, could you go check the FMEA and see if it's in there? And if it's not, let's get it in there so that we know this in the future. That if it comes up again, we know what we know what we want to do about it. Because what I've seen happen is the problem will come up, it'll get put, it'll get addressed, countermeasure will go in place. For some reason, it comes up again later, and the memory of what was done the last time is gone. And so how do you people are spending energy solving a problem they've solved before. So I think there's some value there from it. But the main reason you're doing it is so that you can predict things that might happen, have a probability of happening, and do something about them before they do cause you a big problem. So so big problem, it'll focus more on bigger things like, all of a sudden we can't get this raw material, or we operate in a very narrow band on this specification, and all of a sudden we're outside that band, and then we don't make any good stuff. So I think you'll see that more than, hey, I'm losing one or two today to this thing. What's my mitigation, or what's my countermeasure to deal with that?
Yeah, and sometimes, like capturing countermeasures for failure modes that happen repeatedly, right? There can be like a best practice. Now, there's not always, and sometimes the stated best practice is too abstract to really mean anything. For example, shifting labor. Well, that depends on which department is busy and stuff like that. That's just a just do it for management. But at other times, there might be a specific protocol. And I'm thinking of one specific instance of a plant I was working with. They had a discard that was collected daily, and it was quite a bit. And they had to have a failure mode for the discard collection company not showing up, right? Now, that wasn't on the PFMEA, and it wasn't captured in the daily management because it hadn't happened yet. But when it did happen, it almost shut the plant down. That's how much waste they generated, which, it was almost all going to recycling plants, but it was a lot of waste, right? So we had like the back of the building just filled with trash, right? Filled with discard.
So this is off spec product, or is this just the materials that are used to make the product but don't end up in the product?
It was mostly cardboard due to repackaging to customer spec. Right.
Yeah, my very first business out of school was working in GE's diamond business. And we used to talk about that our raw materials came in 18-wheelers and our product went out in armored cars. So, yeah, there was a lot of discard. I mean, a lot of stuff didn't make it into the product, but a fair amount of the carbon did. So,
yeah.
anyways.
Well, so
but, yeah.
that
Yeah, so that would be something that would say, or that you would put into a process. FMEA is, we've got a stream of waste here, and we'd have this sort of capability to store it. What happens when we can't shift it before that storage facility is full? So
the countermeasure can be specific in that case, because you're going to have a corporate contract with a different supplier in the event that this waste collection company, can't get the work done. So as I work with companies, kind of on their risk management, one of the things that we look at is corporate governance, and policy. If you have to solve a problem by spending money, a lot of companies have rules around that. And that's when this needs to be documented. I actually got in trouble because I just called somebody and gave them my credit card, said, I need this bill. So I got a little slap on the wrist. I'm like, well, you have a choice. I can shut down the plant, or, Mr. So-and-so that got his panties in a wad in accounting can figure out my credit card bill. But so
see, I would have thought if Jake had that problem, it probably would have been just haul it out in the backyard and burn it.
Hell yeah.
Get a nice bonfire going, right? So anyways, so there's one other thing that, and this was another webinar we did actually about a year ago, on rational risk taking. So sort of the opposite of, or not really the opposite of risk mitigation, but it's I'm going to accept the risk. I'm going to accept the risk and live with it. Or I'll take on a risk because I get an advantage out of it. So think about like a luxury product company. A risk they'll take on is product cost. They'll put more into the product cost because the benefit is they can sell it at a high price because of that's their business. Or if you're somebody that's I want to be first to market, you're going to be willing to launch with bugs in the product, which somebody who said I've got an extreme quality reputation is going to miss the timing of a launch in order to get the so it's taking understanding your risk appetite is something. When I've talked to people about this, their first thoughts are risk mitigation. Right? How do I deal with these risks? And the answer, and really what it is what risk are you willing to take, to get something you want for your business? So like if you want to speed up your, and well, actually, a great example of most of the things that are on the list is COVID vaccine development. Right? They were building factories before they knew what they were going to have. So they were overlapping things that normally didn't overlap in the schedule. They made decisions on less data than they normally would have. All these sorts of things, and so they were taking these risks, with the reward being getting a vaccine a year or two faster than they would have otherwise. And so that's the concept of risk, rational risk taking is one that's a bit of fun to think about, and is in a business, say, how can I speed this up, or how can I get something I want by doing something I wouldn't normally do.
Any general?
I like that. I like that concept because in business school, one of the things they teach is business management is a series of placing bets, and a lot of business management education is about how to make good bets. And I think sometimes it varies from person to person and personality to personality and what role you have in the company. I want my quality manager, for example, to raise a stink about everything because, that's her job or whatever. But big picture for business managers, it's not always about minimizing risk. It's really about, assessing risk to reward, and making a decision based on calculus that's always changing based on market factors, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it also, having an understanding of what you will risk, what your appetite is and where that appetite is will guide some of that. So if you're in a medical device situation, you're going to be less likely to say, I'm going to put a product out there with bugs, right? And I'll deal with the bugs later because I want to be the first to market. I want to, now there you might say, I want to be first to market, but I will take on ridiculous levels of cost. So like the first digital X-ray detectors that went out there had about a 5% yield, right? And so they were starting 20 to get one, right? But they got digital X-ray out there and wiped out, and were the first ones to do it, and took a sizable chunk of the market when they did. So there's what's your appetite? So there's a bunch of different things, and it reminds me that when I was in the appliance business, one of our product line managers had 2 signs hanging in his cubicle. We all had cubicles, nobody had offices. One was perfect is the enemy of good. And the other is in every project, there comes a time when you need to shoot the engineers and launch the product.
Straight out of Dilbert, huh?
But, I used to, I'd bridle a bit on this perfect is the enemy of the good. But then, I've learned that, this is, there's customer has some requirements. When you meet those requirements, get the thing out there. Don't sit around and try to make it the best, the perfect product before you're out there. So,
any general words of wisdom to folks listening who might have their own business, might be an officer within a business, on what their general approach to risk management structure should look like?
I'd say separate it into 2 things. One is, on the one side, it's the product and the process. And there, a tool like the tool FMEA is a good tool, right? In terms of assessing, building up your risk, your risk profile there. On the other side is project risk or execution risk. And that it's a simpler process of, what's the probability, high, medium, low. Don't take it any more rigorous than that. What's the impact, high, medium, low? And then address the high highs and the high mediums, and let the low lows and the low mediums alone until you have time to get to them, or if you have time to get to them. So keep it simple on that side of the house when you're saying I want to build a new factory, or I've got a new product that I need to get the final design done on, and stuff like that. So you keep it simple.
Awesome. So FMEA, or PFMEA, useful tool for risk management, and then you kind of talked through this truncated version, the simple version, just high, medium, low probability and impact matrix for execution risks. Are there any other useful tools that you've used, that you think would benefit our listeners to kind of experiment with?
So a specific one I've seen, but I haven't had a chance to use it yet. It was brought up as we were doing that webinar, which was the sprint waterfall split. There's one from a group called, I think it's AIM Institute, called Minesweeper. they do a good job of organizing the assumption type risk. What do I not know? And, so they've got good ways of segmenting it. And then the process, and I think this process rolls over into any risk management, is everybody individually on a team rates the risks, right? And this tool captures all those ratings. And then you get together as a team and you see what the distribution is. And so if everybody's all on, it's a medium risk, no discussion, you move forward. But if you've got somebody's got it high and somebody's got it low, that's a good point. That's a good point to understand why. And especially if you have 5 people on low and 1 guy on high, listen to that person to find out, do they know something the rest of us don't know?
Snuff him out of your project plan.
Yeah.
Mark's
eliminate this person. I've facilitated risk management things where you're sitting there, okay, this one high, medium, low, and there's somebody in the room who's very vocal and very loud, and you just have to almost, you have to say, okay, we heard you, I want to hear everybody else before we put the letter in the box here as we do the assessment. So you've got to sometimes drag the reasoning out of some folks who may be quieter and but know something that the rest of the team should know.
Yeah, and some of the assessment, particularly if you're using evaluation categories like high, medium, and low, there's a team calibration effect that happens, within the team, where me as an individual, I don't necessarily know what the line looks like. We kind of all have to talk about it as a team. So, for example, if I were to give you a pay raise, what's a good pay raise? And the answer is, well, a lot of that depends on how pay raises have been distributed in the past, job title, where you're at in the compensation span for this role, that sort of thing. And so for risk assessment, not probability, because, hopefully there's a little bit of data there, but definitely on the severity side, a lot of the time that kind of emerges as the team talks, just because there's not often a objective standard, to go back to on that.
Yeah. I mean, in FMEA, you've got the 10-point scale, and there's a lot of good definitions of, a 10 on severity is, danger to life and limb, and that sort of thing as you go down. So that's pretty well defined. But in this, say, when you're doing project risk management and you're saying high, medium, low, yeah, it is worthwhile to get some sort of a grounding, to say, okay, high will hit us and knock us 6 months off a schedule, for instance. Medium is, we're going to have to spend more money, but we can still maintain schedule. Low is somebody's going to have to work a couple extra hours, that sort of thing. Those sorts of, get some sort of scale that everybody can nod their head and say, yeah, I think that'll work. Yeah.
So for our audio only listeners, this is John Thacker and Jake Harrell on Equality Podcast with Mark Sneeringer, CI consultant who specializes in design for Six Sigma. And we've been talking about risk management, particularly some ways to make it more effective. Mark, we appreciate you coming on the show and the time that you've given us, the value you've created for our listeners. How can folks get in touch with you out there?
I'm on LinkedIn, so there is a LinkedIn profile out there. Also, email is an effective way to reach me, and it's simply Mark Sneeringer 01, all one word, at Gmail. All right,
so we'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and your email as well. We appreciate you coming on. Is there any wisdom or words of advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I would say if you're worried about doing risk management or, risk assessment, risk management, try it. And if you do, make sure you don't just do the assessment, put it on the shelf, but actually figure out what the mitigations are and execute the mitigations.
great advice. And I would just add on to that. If you're stuck or don't know how to get started, we've got Mark's email in the show notes below. So give him a call. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you run your business and make it better. And that's part of what we highlight on the Quality Podcast. It's okay to ask for help. And there's a lot of people out here that can do just that for you. So Mark, appreciate you coming on the show today. To all of our friends and family out there on YouTube land,